Hi, this is Stephanie Gilbert, back to talk to you more about the Hyflex learning modality that we have here at South Piedmont Community College and how to maximize student learning using Hyflex. During the first video, we talked about how to really walk into a classroom and get ready to teach Hyflex as well as really getting a better understanding of what Hyflex is. During the second video, we talk about thinking about making sure that we align all of our assignments and assessments and materials up to our learning outcomes as we're designing the course and making a very strong, robust online presence, and then adding on to that for Hyflex. During this video, we will be talking about really how to engage your students. It is tricky. I will not say anything else to sugarcoat that. It is tricky because you're really having to address 3 different modalities at the same time for every assignment, for every course. But once you get it rolling, I think you're going to find that the students really appreciate it and really maximize their own learning throughout the process. So let's go ahead and get started on video 3. Okay, so this is about engaging students, and I want to walk through some things to get you thinking about how to engage your students during a Hyflex course. The first one is to think about really when you're posing a question, you're talking to your students. If you're sitting in an in-person class, it's quite easy. You kind of look at them, they look back at you. You can get their attention by moving over in front of them. But now you have other modalities to think about, right? So when you are having, for example, a synchronous Microsoft Teams class, and there's maybe, say, 3 or 4 people on the call, make sure you do things like pause first to give all students time to think about and engage, and perhaps write their answer in the chat if they're not going to, if they're supposed to be on mute and they can't say their question out loud. Sometimes that silence during the pause, waiting for the people online, is a little bit awkward. But as you keep doing it, it'll become more and more second nature to you. So really building in that pause. I'd like to write down a little pause in my notes for myself to remember to do that. Always check the chat for contributions. Last time we talked to you about perhaps finding somebody in your class who could check that chat for you, one of your students, as you go. You will want to repeat student questions. If someone either on the chat, on Teams, or in person ask a question, you're going to want to paraphrase and repeat that for the people that maybe not be able to see the chat or can't hear the question in person. So repeat questions and acknowledge the responses. It takes a lot for somebody on Teams, student on Teams, to go ahead and speak out when they know that they're on a video versus in the classroom. Please acknowledge that and thank them for participating. Bring discussion board comments into the classroom. This is something that was new to me. We're talking about bringing in the people who are part of the asynchronous world. So this is the asynchronous people that are just contributing online. They are not at all synchronous. So what can we do with them? Well, we can bring in comments that they've made or kind of ahas that they found and that you saw, and you're going to have to read through their discussion boards to say, hey, Bill talked about this in the online discussion board. Let's talk about this in class. And you're recording it. So now Bill feels like he's more engaged in the discussion because you brought in his comments. So that's something else you can do. Students will need to really have guidance on how and when to interact with course content, how to interact with the instructor, how to interact with the other students. I mentioned last time, assuming that our students know how the right ways to interact during your class in particular, or Hyflex in general, can be done. So really make sure you have shared class agreements in that participation so that they know what it kind of looks like to participate. You might want to use the whiteboard feature in Teams and then have the people in the classroom also pull up Teams so that everyone now can write on that whiteboard. It's a great way to share engagement and increase engagement across the entire class. You might want to use breakout rooms. Now, in the beginning, when we started teaching with Teams, I think a lot of us were kind of anxious about breakout rooms, and many of us have at least a little bit more comfortable with them. So the findings that we've read about breakout rooms. So a few things. Number one, you want to keep groups small in breakout rooms to the extent that you can. Only have 2 or 3 people into a breakout room. If you can, send the questions in advance or through announcements into the breakout rooms. A lot of times we'll give breakout rooms an assignment of what to do while they're there, and then they get into the room and they can't remember it, right? So if you can send it to them in advance, that'd be great. And as an instructor, if you could, go ahead and pop into those breakout rooms as you go, and make sure that everybody's on track. Okay. Another thing that I've seen that I like is to have peer buddies with online and in person. So what that would mean is that if I have someone who I know always comes to class or often comes to class and they want to link up with someone who's online, make that happen. Assign that in the beginning of these people are buddies and they're going to be linking up together. It helps form community. Make sure you offer students outside resources. This is always important for teaching, but it's even more important for Hyflex. Virtual office hours. Let the people who are online participating get office hour help as much as the people who are on campus. So please make sure you have virtual office hours. A lot of people like to call them student hours, so it is very clear that these are for the student. Discuss the resources such as the library and academic support services throughout the semester, not just once in the beginning, but periodically revisit. How can we use the library? How can we use tutoring? We have virtual ways of using tutoring in the library now, so this is really, really nicely in line with Hyflex. I also have on there regular check-ins with your learners. So to me, you can't over check-in. So can you check in before the semester starts? Survey your students. Check for their understanding of what they need out of this course. That's Hyflex, what their expectations are of this course. Find out how comfortable they are with technology. Find out during your sessions, Tuesday at 4 o'clock, now we're talking, how are we doing now? What can we do differently from the next course to make sure that this is running smoothly for you? And then go ahead, you might even have a chat on your online function to also get that feedback. Early or throughout the semester, as well as naturally at the end of the semester, is so important. And then actually acting on that feedback and making sure that you address those questions and concerns. Super helpful. It also helps to understand academically what else they need as far as the topics that are being taught. Finally, provide guided note-taking. Now, I have, I believe, a little bit later on, we're going to get to that. I think I have a sample of this. Guided note-taking is so helpful for engaging your online student. This is where you actually send out, they can be almost blank, forms to them to say, go ahead and take notes. But they're not completely blank. These notes, these forms might say, okay, what are the major learning outcomes? And then they have to write them down. What are the major concepts that they learned? What are the key terms that they learned? You're asking students to fill it out, but you're giving them a guided format because you know that this is the format that's going to help in your class. We can give examples of it later on. But studies have shown that guided note-taking is super helpful. You might even have people in the classroom and students in the classroom volunteer to help fill out those guided notes and to share that back out with the rest of the class. Okay, let's see. Let's move on. Activities, nice. Okay, let's talk about some activities that we can engage with the student classroom. 1 second, I'll get some water. So some of you use these all the time anyway, or at least part of them. We'll talk about them in a little more. There's the great ways of engaging the students. Number 1, poll everywhere. This is a free online polling. There are polling options that are also through Microsoft Teams. Through Microsoft Office that you can use. You could use Poll Everywhere, anything you want to do. We have clickers for in the classroom. Frequent short polls or quizzes help maintain engagement and check for understanding throughout the class. Flipping the classroom. Listen, guys, this is critical for Hyflex success and understanding how to flip your classroom. Flip your classroom basically says that you ask your students to participate in advance of the in-person session and give them materials to say, I want you to watch this video. I want you to participate in this discussion board. I want you to watch this lecture. I want you to read this passage prior to class so that when you get students in the class together, they're all ready to go. And they've already done the bulk of the reading and research. Now they're coming to really collaborate and talk about what they've learned. Some instructors that I've talked to say it's a little challenging because I do tell them to do that and they don't do it. My suggestion is to go ahead and have a short quiz as soon as they get into class. A graded quiz. It can be real simple, real short, just as checking for understanding right when they come in so they'll know the expectations are real. The chat function. Assign a student to monitor the chat. I talked about that a little while ago. But what you can also do is for yourself, set periodic times, like say every 10 minutes, that you check the chat for comments or questions. Set expectations for chat as well. So in other words, explain to your students how they can use the chat function. Is it for note taking? So maybe they want to write on there, okay, I'm going to chat in the chat function some of the notes that I think is important what I'm hearing in lecture. And they put that in the notes. Is it for commenting? Is it for sharing resources? So in other words, if my instructor talks about something and I've seen an article out there, a current event, I can put a resource, a link to that resource in the chat function. Obviously, asking questions and helping each other is super important. So what I'm asking for you to do as an instructor is talk to your students about all the things you can do with that chat function. Note taking, I talked already about this. Create a Google Doc and give them some prompt questions and then use that Google Doc where all the participants, regardless of how they're participating, can get into that Google Doc, the same form, shared form, and they're entering what they learned. And then they keep that whole thing for themselves. That's another option of how to do shared note taking. Breakout rooms and small discussions. So, like I said, there's a great way to do breakout rooms. A lot of it for me is take practice and takes practice. I've seen it where not only do you send the questions into the breakout group forums, but you actually send Google Docs into the rooms so they can fill them out there. And then that whole thing gets shot back so you know what's all happening and you can watch it as an instructor. You can watch that Google Doc be populated while they're out in their discussion forums. Okay, the next thing to talk about, I wanted to give you some real specifics here as far as how to keep engagement. And we will have teaching exchanges on these different types of activities. But a jigsaw basically is dividing students into groups and giving them each a different text to read and discuss with their group. Okay, and then you redivide them, and you can do this with breakout rooms or in person. And then you redivide them and say, okay, now you're representing this standpoint because your article was on this. Go into this room and talk to these other people about it. You can do this with in person. You can have the teams in breakout rooms. You can also pull your asynchronous groups in. You can do jigsaws with discussion boards and discussion forums and having each group read, or each smaller group read different pieces and post on a discussion board. So different ways to do that. A fishbowl, super cool. You have the people sitting in the middle talking about the topic, people on the outside watching. It could be that you had the people calling out on Teams be the people watching, and then the people in the classroom are the ones who are actually having the discussion, and then the people on the outside get the feedback, or vice versa. Once again, what if you videotape that whole fishbowl, put it online? Now your asynchronous people can comment on both of those. They can comment on what the people in the inside group said. They can comment on the comments, and then they put everything into their into the online discussion board. Think, pair, share, we talked about before, which is to have a student read an article, pair with another student to discuss it, and then share their findings with a larger group. This is a real simple, great way to make sure that students are engaged on a regular basis, is to think, pair, share. What I wanted to do here is, remember in the beginning I talked about having some sample working agreements. I'm going to show you a few samples in general. This is tiny little letters. Don't worry about it because I'm going to actually highlight it and we can send attachments with these different examples. But I wanted to talk about some of the highlighted parts about the working agreements. These are the agreements that your students make for themselves and that you as an instructor contribute to. You might want to talk to them about how many times you want them to log into Moodle or Canvas each week. how many hours a day can they expect to be participating? You might want to address on